Hello and welcome to this session looking at the potential impact of Brexit on the role of the qualified person for pharmacovigilance in Europe. My name is Miranda Dollen. I'm a Vice President of Pharmacovigilance at the MAPI Group. I have more than 20 years experience in pharmacovigilance, but the last 12 I have been a qualified person for pharmacovigilance. So I'd like to start by focusing on what the role of pharmacovigilance is. The World Health Organization defines this as the science activities relating to the detection, assessment, understanding and prevention of adverse effects or any other drug-related problem. In other words, it's to protect the little guys, to make sure that we're not doing any more harm than we are good when providing them with health care. Pharmacovigilance has come a long way since the Victorian days when we were prescribing cocaine for toothache. It took a big leap in the 1960s. In the 1960s, we saw mornidine being introduced. This is thalidomide being prescribed for women whilst they were pregnant to help with their morning sickness. So now she can cook breakfast again. Unfortunately, thalidomide led to a big disaster, resulting in 10,000 cases of infants having malformation of limbs. This really triggered the pharmacovigilance that we see today, where the World Health Organization took an initiative to have a systematic collection of adverse events in a safety database so that we could truly understand the safety profile of our products and take action to prevent this kind of disaster happening again. We saw another leap in the evolution of pharmacovigilance in 1995, when we saw the role of the European Qualified Person for Pharmacovigilance being introduced. At this point, we wanted somebody to take personal accountability for the safety of patients. Pharmacovigilance has evolved so far by this point, and the size of the pharmaceutical industry has evolved so far, that it was difficult to understand where accountability truly lay for the safety of patients. So the agencies wanted to have one person to take personal accountability for the safety of patients and for the systems being used by the pharmaceutical industry to ensure their safety. So what does the European QPPV actually do? This is a role which every marketing authorization holder in Europe needs to have in place. It is a named individual who is on the marketing authorization for every product with personal accountability for the system and for the patients receiving those products. This person is permanently available 24 hours a day. So if an emergency situation arises, they can be contacted on the weekend in the middle of the night to make sure that action can be taken as urgently as is needed. They need to be appropriately qualified and experienced. These individuals have worked in the pharmaceutical industry for decades. They have worked in pharmacovigilance. They understand this science inside out and are best positioned to be able to give appropriate advice both to regulatory agencies and to the pharmaceutical industry. Importantly for today's topic, they are legally required to be resident in the European Economic Area. This means that they can be a resident in any member state of the European Union, or some of the EFTA states, including Norway, Liechtenstein and Iceland. This role comes with a lot of accountability, and there are penalties for this role not being conducted appropriately. These include financial fines, but also criminal prosecution, and this is to this named individual, not just to the pharmaceutical company who employs them. So now we have a little bit of background on pharmacovigilance in general. I wanted to focus on the UK as we start to think about the implications of the Brexit. So the UK has the UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, the MHRA, governing pharmaceutical regulation. And the MHRA is a world leader in pharmacovigilance. They are present at all of the forums discussing the development of regulation. They are present at all of the forums who are making decisions about what to do with the safety of products. Importantly, for Europe, they have played a critical role in the development of the European pharmacovigilance legislation, which we are now required to comply with. Think a little bit more broadly. On a European level, legislation is governed by the European Medicines Agency. This is currently located in London. The European Medicines Agency has a committee which makes decisions at a centralised level across Europe, impacting every patient in Europe. This is known as the Pharmaceutical Risk Assessment Committee, and the chair of this committee is currently a UK chair. So we can see that the UK is not only a world leader, but European pharmacovigilance is tightly integrated with the UK. So now looking at the European Qualified Person for Pharmacovigilance, we actually see that a majority of people holding this role are located in the UK. This reflects the predominance of the UK in the pharmaceutical legislation, the presence of the EMA in the UK, and the fact that many pharmaceutical companies have global or regional headquarters based here in the UK. So what about Brexit? What is the potential impact? And of course today there are many unknowns, but we can look at some possible scenarios which might happen as we move through the Brexit process. So one option, we might choose to leave the European Union, but perhaps stay in the single market, becoming a member of the European Free Trade Association in a manner similar to that of Norway, Liechtenstein and Iceland. This would allow the QPPV role to remain in the UK. However, we might see the impact of the MHRA decreasing in this scenario, and this might undermine the role of the QPPV. What if the UK leaves both the UK and the single market? A scenario which is looking increasingly likely at the moment. In this situation, the QPPV would definitely have to leave the UK, and it's probable that the European Medicines Agency will also leave the UK. So what is the impact if that happens? So a potential concern is the loss of UK pharmacovigilance experts. The QPPV is a critical role in the pharmaceutical system. We see them ensuring that the global pharmacovigilance system is in place and is compliant, and that appropriate decision making is being taken place for patients. In addition, with the number of global and regional headquarters that we see in the UK, we might well see a loss of leadership from there as companies consider whether or not to keep those entities here in the UK. We might have a loss of ability to influence global pharmacovigilance systems. The QPPV does not just look after the European pharmacovigilance system. They need to ensure that worldwide pharmacovigilance activities are taking place, that the adverse events and safety issues occurring outside of the UK are appropriately communicated here, and that the appropriate decision making can take place. With the possible move of the EMA outside of the UK, the MHRA influence might decrease. We might have less ability to impact that European level of legislation, which makes the European Union a very safe place for pharmacovigilance activities. We might see a loss of business for UK service providers. The role of the QPPV is such a niche product that we often see it outsourced to service providers. With that comes other activities. It's often that not only is the QPPV outsourced, but pharmacovigilance activities linked to the pharmaceutical systems are also outsourced. So we might see those activities moving outside of the UK as well. And all of this means the potential for a loss of jobs. There might be movement of the QPPV, but there might also be movement of global and regional departments outside of the UK. And the transition of the EMA outside of the UK has also potential for us to see loss of jobs. But ultimately, all of this concern is about the potential impact on the patients. They are the reason that we are all here performing this job, the reason why this legislation has been put in place. Patient safety in the UK is actually based on what is happening across Europe. We have a system in place which allows early signals to be detected from patient activity in Europe and also outside of Europe. We have a system which allows for early decision making and then harmonised action across the European Union. if the UK is not part of that, what is the impact on the UK patient going to be? We have a very robust process in place where we can detect a safety issue worldwide. We can validate that it truly is a signal and not background noise. We can prioritise how quickly it needs to be actioned, and then we can assess what needs to be done. Does action need to be taken in just one country? Does it need to be taken across Europe? Do we need to start interacting with other agencies outside of Europe? And then we have to make recommendation for action and exchange information with all of our stakeholders, not just the regulatory agencies, but also healthcare professionals, patients, anybody who is involved in the healthcare system. So we might lose our ability to be involved in this process early and to be part of this harmonised decision-making process which protects the health of all of the patients in the UK. This is our primary concern about the impact of Brexit. There's also a significant resource implication. The UK legislation is predominantly based on the European legislation. It essentially says, follow the European requirements with very little adaptation for the UK. If we lose access to that legislation, we'll need to completely redesign a new set of legislation for the UK. And do we have the resources available to do that? And is a 2-year Brexit plan sufficient time to do that? This is a significant concern as new legislation normally takes a lot longer than 2 years to implement. However, this is also an opportunity for us. I don't want to leave with just the bad news story. So what could we do? The UK leadership in pharmacovigilance is not something that we want to lose. This could potentially be an opportunity to build it further and to take our interest not just in what's happening in Europe, but to take it outside of Europe. So we could strengthen our relationships, for example, with the FDA or Japan or other key regions. And we might have less constraint than we have at the moment, having to work within the European structure. So there's a potential opportunity for us to look outside of Europe and to further our leadership within pharmacovigilance. We do want to continue personal accountability for safety. The role of the qualified person is in European legislation, so that European level role will disappear if the UK leaves the European Union. So we would strongly recommend that we actually establish a new local role at the national level for the UK. And therefore we can continue to have personal accountability for the safety of patients and not have accountability being diluted across a global organisation and the complications that come with that. This would also allow for a forum where we could collaborate in the development of any new legislation and for the maintenance of that legislation in the long term. And we would very much like to see the UK-based QPPVs involved in the development of any new legislation. This would also allow a forum for expertise which could be used for the evolution of relationships outside of the UK and outside of Europe. This would be a readily available pool of talent and expertise which could partner with the UK legislators as we look to develop these new relationships moving forward. We would also like to see a national pharmacovigilance association dedicated to the UK. There are a number of associations at the moment which look at the European level or the international level. However, we would like to see the UK-based QPPVs having the ability to come together to pool their talent and their expertise. And this again would allow a structured mechanism for consultation during the development of legislation, for access to expertise by the industry and by the regulators, and the development of common approaches. Between us, we see many different ways of approaching the same problem. And if we can collaborate, we can maybe find a smooth transition into the future. And this allows the opportunity to build on this UK presence of pharmacovigilance that we already have. What is happening at the moment? We're at very early stages of Brexit, so I'm sure this story is going to continue to evolve over the next few months and years. However, the UK Parliamentary Select Committees have a group dedicated to science technology, and they have an open inquiry at the moment about leaving the European Union, and they have asked for feedback on the implications and the opportunities for science and research. A group of QPPVs have submitted some written evidence which you can find on their website at the link shown on the slide. This is just one step in this story, so what can you do to help? You can submit additional statements to the Select Committee so that we see multiple layers of understanding and opinions about the impact of Brexit. You can make an appointment to see your MP to discuss this in further detail. You can contact any associations that you are a member of, the Drug Information Association, for example, and volunteer your services for Brexit. But importantly, we need to be heard. We know that the parliamentary system may not be that familiar with pharmacovigilance, yet alone the role of the qualified person. And we really want to see the qualified person taking a pivotal role as we move pharmacovigilance forward into this new era. This is a unique pool of people who have the expertise and the talent and the knowledge to help drive this forward. And we need to be heard that this expertise is available for consultation as we move into the future. So thank you very much, and thank you to a number of QPPVs who have helped put together this information and participated in the development of the statement which has been submitted to the Select Committee. Thank you for your attention today, and don't hesitate to contact me or anybody else on that list if you have any questions.